During this pandemic, many patients suffering from chronic diseases could not reach hospital due to lockdown and also suffered due to lack of medicines, sometimes in pharmacies. We have seen cancer patients missing their chemotherapies session, and those who need dialysis feared going to the hospital due to the fear of getting infected. Let me introduce our esteemed guest today, this morning, on the inaugural session of Day 4 of Gratitude Week. We have with us Dr. M.R. Rajgopal, is the chairman of Pallium India and director of Trivandrum Institute of Palliative Sciences. He was one of the founders of the pioneering Pain and Palliative Care Society in Calicut in Kerala, which made palliative care a popular movement in that state, and is now working tirelessly to make this a national movement. We will be joining by Dr. Sudeep Gupta, Director of Advanced Center for Treatment, Research and Education in Cancer at the iconic Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai. We are also honored to have our patron, our mentor, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. He is the chair of Indian Academy of Public Health and also the member of ISW Council Advisory Board. I would just welcome again Dr. Sudeep Gupta, who has joined us, and I'll begin our discussion, and we'll go to Dr. Sudeep Gupta first. Dr. Gupta, you are heading an important department of the India's iconic, legendary, and I think center of excellence in the cancer care. Cancer has spread its presence across our society. We are seeing that almost maybe more than 2 million patients we have in our country, and you can correct the numbers as you will be having better numbers. And we are seeing that almost over 1 million patients are diagnosed every year. Maybe the similar number of patients are also dying because of cancer. Dr. Gupta, you have seen this almost 4 months of pandemic lockdowns. What has been the situation related to cancer patients, and how effectively our healthcare system could cater to them so that this disease is not becoming another collateral damage of this pandemic? Dr. Gupta.
So good morning, and first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here, and my greetings to Dr. Rajgopal. We had the pleasure of hosting him in Tata Memorial Center last year for an oration. So coming to your question about how has the COVID pandemic impacted the care of cancer patients, like every other sector, the care of cancer patients has also been impacted, and your numbers were absolutely spot on. There are about 1.2 million new cancer cases every year. We see approximately 60,000 new cases at Tata Memorial Center every year. I think the medical fraternity and oncologists from all over India have tried to adapt to the situation as also the patients. So at Tata Memorial Center, what we have done is that we have continued at about 2/3 of our capacity. A number of patients visit our center from all over India. We have established remote consult centers for those patients. We have tried to connect them with local oncologists when they have not been able to travel to our center. And we have continued to perform both curative as well as emergency surgeries at our hospital. I'm happy to inform you that over a 40-day period from the beginning of lockdown to the end of April, when this data was analyzed, we performed almost 520 surgeries at our hospital. These are all cancer surgeries. And these resulted in all of these patients getting cured of their disease, and the rate of COVID infection was actually very low. We have established some other patient-centric measures like helping them with accommodation, helping them with rations, helping them with other amenities. And I must say that the patients have also risen to the occasion. They have braved a variety of odds to actually travel to their nearest hospital and continue to receive care for their disease, as have their relatives. So the COVID pandemic has impacted. Patients have not been able to travel to their preferred hospitals and to their preferred doctors. But overall, I would say that we have done reasonably well under the circumstances.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Dr. Rajgopal, you heard Dr. Gupta, and it's wonderful, actually very impressive and encouraging that around 520 cancer surgeries could be performed during this lockdown also, which is a fairly, I think a good number, and gives some assurance that the critical care was reaching to the people who needed it most at that time. Dr. Rajgopal, your area of functioning is very wide, and I was impressed to when I heard from you that how passionately you work in the area of reducing sufferings of people, and palliative care, which is the work which you are doing. To my understanding, which was, I'm happy to accept that it was quite limited. I used to consider only it as a end of life care. But what you gave is a very different perspective, that how palliative care is a part of every stage of care and has to be embedded, because more than making it an end of life, it is more, empathetic way of delivering care. Dr. Rajgopal, what is your overall experience of this 4 months of lockdowns, pandemic, and you being the champion of equitable care to all? What is your opinion or experience? Were we able to provide equitable care to all those who need it? Or if it was not in that level, how it can be improved further?
Kamal, thank you. And Dr. Sudeep Gupta, thank you for that brilliant beginning. And I will start by paying respect to your institution. Your institution never faltered. From the time of lockdown, you showed an example by continuing to function. Unfortunately, that did not happen across the nation. A lot of institutions closed its door, succumbed to the panic, and just stopped functioning. So, Kamal, we have certainly examples to show, like Tata Memorial Hospital. Unfortunately, we had to make sure that the next time, as the Honorable Minister said it, these things happen again. The next time something strikes us, examples like Tata Memorial Hospital are taken, how they function. And that should be replicated by all healthcare. Healthcare institutions cannot stop functioning. If it doesn't stop functioning on the war front, where it's so most needed, the same applies to the country.
Thank you so much. It's quite a brief and I think loaded statement that while institutions like Tata Memorial Hospital could perform and continue to do the work which they are supposed to do, other institutions could not. But I just want to would like to hear a little more that what is your opinion? Where that equitable care could not reach to the people? What may be the volume or the magnitude of that, if it is there?
Kamal, in 2018, when the world nations got together at the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, and came out with a declaration, they made some powerful statements. One, healthcare should reach people where they are when they need it. I'm sorry, that did not happen. What we saw, even in Kerala, where things were a lot better than some other states, what we saw was people could not access available services. The hospitals were there, the pharmacies were open, but there was a huge, wide gap between people and these establishments. Part of the reason is physical, the lockdown. Part of it is emotional. The 3 days later, after the lockdown, we took that much of time to collect ourselves. We gave a press release. Anybody with serious health issues where you think some support can be given, please contact us. This was in Trivandrum. And we got the calls. There was a 62-year-old man. He needed medications for his diabetes. He needed only to cross the road to get to the pharmacy. But he was in such panic that he couldn't bear to step out of the house. 3 days, medicines were stopped. Can you blame him? You can't always control on your own mind when you are living alone at that age. I mean, just as an example, actually, Kamal, dialysis centers shut down. Many did. Many continued to function, many shut down. And people didn't have money. We came across this auto driver who had already had a transplanted kidney. If he continued without his immunosuppressants for a week, his kidneys would be rejected by the body and the whole family would be destroyed. And he's an auto driver without money. Where would he get the money from? And only because he saw the newspaper and contacted our helpline, I'm sure the whole family would have been wiped out. And this happened across the country quite a lot.
Yes, so we saw those stories, Dr. Rajgopal, and this is definitely heartbreaking when you see that somebody who cannot access some very critical care because the environmental situations are not allowing them. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, I would like to understand from you. So we saw Dr. Gupta saying that the institution could perform, and which is being appreciated by everyone, and Dr. Rajgopal also highlighted that. But Dr. Rajgopal is also highlighting that there were, I think, massive number of people who could not get that care, and he's bringing in some really palpable example also for that. What do you think? This Gratitude Week, we are doing this in thankfulness for our doctors, medical practitioners, workers, and all those who are involved in that. And they are the face of healthcare. When these kind of failure, which Dr. Rajgopal is identifying, is it a systematic failure, or it is the failure of those caregivers who normally get those brickbats of not delivery of these critical services?
Thanks, Kamal, and I appreciate the wonderful introduction given by both Dr. Rajagopal and Dr. Gupta. What happens when you a crisis in health is the cracks in the health care delivery system get widened and they get noticed. When you talk of non-communicable diseases, and some of which were referred to by both Dr. Gupta and Dr. Rajagopal, we probably don't know all the diabetics, cancer patients, asthma patient, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease patients in the community. Of those whom we know, a large proportion don't have access to healthcare. Those who have access to healthcare don't have compliance. And these get widened further, and it gets noticed that, oh, these people, non-communicable diseases, these are comorbidities, and they are at a higher risk of death. So there are two ways in which it gets impacted. One is the direct impact, and second is the indirect impact. From the direct impact, we know that everyone is susceptible to infection, but those who are 60 plus, those who have comorbid conditions, cancers, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, asthma, lung diseases, and also those who are smokers, they are at higher risk of having a complication and of dying. This is the direct impact. We know every day it is in the newspaper. Second is the indirect impact. Outpatients were closed. I stay in the neighborhood of All India Institute of Medical Sciences where I studied. OPDs were closed with the lockdown for weeks. Where will a person who needs a checkup for high blood pressure go? OPD attendance in private hospital in Delhi came down by about 40% to 50%. Half of them stopped going to OPD. The planned surgeries were postponed for both reasons. One is the patient didn't want to go to hospital because there was so much of scare, and second is all the resources in the hospital were diverted. So we need to, yes, in normal situation, make sure that non-communicable diseases receive adequate attention, and there is a special attention given to them because they are at higher risk of dying from COVID infection. There need to be special attention given to those with non-communicable diseases during such outbreaks. It did not happen. Every resource was diverted to COVID, and gradually, when a lot of noise was made, they were brought back into the system. I'm very happy to hear from Dr. Rajgopal and from Dr. Gupta that they made sure that these services are available even during this COVID outbreak.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjeev. Dr. Gupta, you are heading important aspect of an institution which gets patients from across the country, not only the Maharashtra or the western or the let's say central part of the India, but maybe I think all across. When this the diagnosis of cancer, or the people who have already been diagnosed of cancer and they are in the middle of their treatment processes or the chemotherapy cycles and all that which they need to come, or maybe staying there, we hear those stories that how much influx of patients come to Tata Memorial Hospital. During the lockdown, all that got disrupted. What is your estimation or opinion that how many people you would not have been able to provide that care which your institution always stood for providing that care? And we might have lost many lives in sufferings and in trauma, that despite knowing that the treatment can come or they can get that treatment, they cannot reach to that just because the movement has been blocked.
So thank you very much for asking that question, and let me thank Dr. Rajgopal for his compliments to our institution, and we continue to derive inspiration from Dr. Rajgopal and his work. So you are absolutely correct that about 2/3 of our patients come from outside Maharashtra and 1/3 from Maharashtra. And if that is about 60,000 new patients every year, then you can divide that. 2/3 of 60,000 is about 35,000, and if you divide that by 1/3 of a year, that is maybe about 15,000. So that is a back of the hand calculation as to how many patients might have been unable to reach us. But let me say a couple of things. The first is that gradually the healthcare infrastructure in India is improving in many parts of India. So I'm not claiming that we have become developed overnight, but in many parts of India, for example, in Assam, in some of the other northeastern states, even in places like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and elsewhere, the healthcare infrastructure is slowly improving. And Tata Memorial Center has created what is called the National Cancer Grid. And this is a network of close to about 200 institutions from all over India who are connected to each other, who talk to each other, who deliver care by some common standards that are agreed upon. And we have a large number of our alumni and other individuals with whom we are able to connect our patients. So what we did very early on in the lockdown was to establish, both in Tata Memorial Hospital and ACTREC, is what we call the remote consult centers. And we provided, a call center-like facility where patients could call in And because we have a robust electronic medical record, we have all the records, when the patient calls us with their case number. And, we are able to suggest to them that, if they were coming for a routine follow-up and they were in remission, then they could postpone, they could meet with their local oncologists. If they were already undergoing chemotherapy, then based on the response to the already received chemotherapy, we suggested whether they could continue under the care of their local doctors. Having said all of that, a situation like COVID and an unprecedented situation like COVID would have adversely impacted the care of many thousands of patients who would have come to Tata Memorial Center otherwise. And here, I would like to say that our society continues to have social inequalities. People who can pay for their care can afford to get reasonable quality care in many parts of India. But our public health system needs to be strengthened. And one lesson from this pandemic, if we have to derive it, is to strengthen the primary, the secondary, as well as the tertiary healthcare system. And I think Kerala is a very shining example of how, within India, we have a system whereby at least, the public health emergencies can be brought under control and some semblance of normality can continue to be maintained. And this is not only now, we have to compliment Kerala because they also brought the previous Nipah outbreak under control. And I think there are many lessons from Kerala and from some other institutions and states, but we definitely need a strengthening of the public health infrastructure because that is what the majority of our population depends on. And we can't just think about the 5% of our population who's able to afford any kind of care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, and giving this very, honest assessment of that how many people might have not been able to get that care. But this is also very encouraging to hear that your national cancer grade could have ensured that some kind of care is reaching to the people where they were. Dr. Rajgopal, since I started, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a healthcare professional. But since I started writing on healthcare as a journalist or during my time as a healthcare communicator, I have always been hearing that Kerala is a shining example. And it's been almost now, I think, 15 to 16 years of hearing that Kerala is a shining example of be it a public healthcare system or maybe, education system. We saw that, as Dr. Gupta said, that Nipah virus combat, which they did very well, and the same health minister was on the front line fighting that. But so what does stop other states? And it's been 10, 15 years we are talking about the same good role model lying in our own country. What does stop other states to just replicate it? Or at least learn from that and do something, because we will keep talking about that we should learn, but I don't see we are learning. Or is it there that even Kerala, our health system also need to improve on, and that may not be as perfect as it is looking from far? Dr. Rajgopal, sorry.
Thank you, Kamal. For one thing, by no means would anybody in Kerala claim that we are anywhere near perfect. We are a shining example only because we are doing better than others. Let us be frank. It is nowhere near where it should be. Having said that, you yourself have pointed out most of the major positives. You mentioned education, which is closely related with public health. Unless people are educated, it's difficult to get health across to them, because having it available in the health center is by no means enough. Secondly, you mentioned the leadership. We are all very, very proud of our health minister, Shailaja teacher, who was absolutely marvelous. And the leadership found the support. They established advisory committees for various purposes, and the move was both scientific and pragmatic. But in the background of all this, there is another strong point. That's the community's involvement. This is almost invisible. The ASHA workers are such a prominent part of the whole thing. In every panchayat, the ASHA worker is phenomenal. In Kerala, it's in many parts of the country, but in Kerala, that's a very strong factor in getting healthcare across to people. But it is also involvement of the community in other matters. Like for more than, it's 27 years now, since the voluntary activity started in palliative care in Kerala. Would you believe that there are more than 450 non-governmental organizations in the field of palliative care in Kerala? All of them are not formal registered organizations, but what it means is, if there are suffering people in my neighborhood, the local community takes responsibility to get some support to them. You mentioned access to healthcare. How many elders are living alone? Even in my tiny state of Kerala, would you believe, by 2015 estimate, there were more than 170,000 elders living alone. That doesn't include somebody living with a home nurse. Totally alone. And where would these elders get support? What our volunteers do is to move across to them. Make sure that they get care where they are. Not universal, this doesn't reach everybody, but at least 40% of the needy get care in their homes with the support of the system. And another major positive is that Kerala established a state palliative care policy. Again, this is novel for the whole of the developing world. Every single primary health center, that's more than around 950 of them, has one nurse with training in palliative care, working only in palliative care. She visits every bed-bound patient in that panchayat at least once a month. If a catheter needs to be changed, it is done there, and with some support from the doctor in the center. So there are these factors in the background which to a large extent helped us to cope.
Good. That's quite inspiring. That there is a very well-led, local and grassroots system available, especially which is functional. I think as you said, the system may be available in many other places, but the functionality and efficacy might have been an issue. Dr. Sanjeev, you have been seeing healthcare systems in India, outside India, across the globe, and have been also advising and helping other states to think and upgrade their healthcare systems. What does it that stops them from replicating something like Kerala, which is there shining for long and does not take much to just replicate the same model? I think we are part of the same country. We can exchange our ideas. We can, So is it the lack of ideas or skills, or it is the lack of will?
I don't think we lack ideas or we lack expertise. And if you look around the world, you have many Indians in leading international organizations, name it WHO, UNICEF, or doctors providing healthcare in UK or US. So that's not. I think there is will, especially the political will. They make announcement in every budget of increasing number of medical colleges, and last few years, every government every year is trying to open more AIIMS. By just giving name, you don't have a quality institution. So there's more of political compulsion in doing what they want to do than the real impact. And very important point Dr. Rajgopal raised is lack of investment in primary health care. in countries. We heard about Kerala, how well they have done. They were reluctant to take on accredited social health activist scheme, but when they took it, they ran with it and empowered her, and she has become a very important link between community and healthcare system. She makes sure that people who need it, they get to the health facilities and get health care. The staff at sub-centers and primary healthcare center, I'll just give you a figure for UP, for example. They needed about 22,000 auxiliary nurse with midwives. They had about 18,000 of them. What prevents them from recruiting ANMs? You don't have to open new medical colleges. All the schools are ANM training schools are run by the government. They can increase the training if there is lack, but there is no lack of trained ANM. They can recruit them. Kerala, for example, recruited 276 doctors in one day on 13th of May, if I remember correctly. Why can't they recruit auxiliary nurse midwife? There were 2,000 positions of the level 2 which ANMs get promoted. 2,000 of those positions were vacant. This is only a departmental order they can issue. So lack of investment in primary healthcare emerges as a major difference between Kerala and other states. So I hope in the next budget we will hear more about opening more ANM training school, more male worker training school, more position for health assistant, male and female, who are supervisors for auxiliary nurse midwife. And to repeat what Dr. Rajagopal said, we need to provide health care to the people where they are and when they need it. Now the COVID epidemic also has reached rural areas. If your primary healthcare system is weak, we will have catastrophe in the making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. So I think this story continues, and let's hope that this pandemic would be an enough jolt on to I think shake up all our government institutions and policymakers to not only announce more but also walk the talk when it comes to ramping up the healthcare system. I'll come back to the essence of our program. The essence of our program is that whatever it is, there are millions of healthcare workers, be it in Kerala or in any other state or in Delhi or in Mumbai, who are struggling, striving to provide healthcare in whatever manner it can happen. And at least that is the only silver lining we have as of now. Dr. Gupta, in your institution, where a huge number of healthcare workers are there providing care, and since you have done so many of surgeries, that means there a majority of that system was working. How has been the experience during this pandemic? What kind of fear, what kind of risks, what kind of challenges you and your teams, your people had to face while ensuring that the care keep going to the people? And how has been the overall support system from the society, from the government, and from your own patients in making that happen?
So again, thank you for that question. And like everyone else, healthcare workers are also human beings, and they are subject to the same fears and anxieties as the rest of the society. So like everyone else, our employees, our healthcare workers, our administrative staff have felt anxiety and some amount of fear during the pandemic. And it is natural because you are not only worried about yourself but also your family members, etc., and others. So what has helped in our case is two things. One is that very early on during the lockdown and during the epidemic, we established standard operating procedures whereby we ensured that if somebody was to get exposed to this infection, it would not be a large number of people at one go. And I think many other organizations also implemented that eventually, but we were amongst the first to do it. So we did not land into a situation where, like many other hospitals, the entire hospital was shut down. Number two, there was an open channel of communication from the leadership to all the employees of the hospital, including doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers, as well as administrative staff. And it is not only the it is not only the actual healthcare workers who deliver health, but everybody should realize that the accountant who collects cash from the patients, and the person who cleans the ward, there are several other people who are all cogs in the wheel and who collaborate to deliver healthcare, and it is their anxieties and their fears that we have to allay. We also very early on in the epidemic established our hospital not only for care of cancer patients but also cancer patients with COVID infection and our own staff members with COVID infection. So, we have very advanced facilities. We are able to take care of emergencies. We are able to take care of very sick patients. We have top class intensive care facilities. We have knowledgeable individuals who are up to date with the evidence as it evolves. And once our employees and our healthcare workers realize that should they get COVID infection and become sick, they will be taken care of with state-of-the-science treatment that is available anywhere in the world, I think their anxieties and fears were allayed. And then, we were able to continue to function almost at full capacity. But given the constraints of the epidemic, we had to perform about 2/3 of our capacity. And that was mainly because patients from the other states could not reach us. So the idea is to collaborate with our staff members, to have an open line of communication, to care for them, to let them know that, we will be there for them should anything happen. I will just take 30 more seconds. At ACTREC, which I head, there are about 6 infrastructure projects that are ongoing, and these are large buildings. And we had 500 construction workers in the middle of our campus during the peak of lockdown. And all of these individuals were, of course, they were struggling with anxiety about their family members. They were wanting to go back to their states. We ensured that they were also cared for during this epidemic, and we regularly communicated with them. I held open sessions with them, and from my own experience, if you are honest and if you answer most of the questions to your ability, I think systems can continue to function. It is only when you hope for secrecy and some diktats from the top that the system breaks down.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That's wonderful that not only the each and every person working on the system, but also those who are, putting something very important, creating that infrastructure, they were also very well taken care of in your institution. Dr. Rajgopal, where do you see this, the same question for you also, that what the anxiety, challenges, and risks you saw when the people, whether providing palliative care under your guidance, under your institution, or across in the healthcare system of Kerala, or any other system which you have been monitoring. What is your opinion? And were there any gap because of the fear and challenges that healthcare could not reach, or these people rose above that and ensure that the care who need it is reaching?
Kamal, in the opening that you gave, you showed Dr. Srinath Reddy for about 10 seconds. And he said something. Healthcare should not be a business, it should be a service. So long as the leadership of any healthcare institution believes that, they would believe that the healthcare system's duty, I am quoting ICMR, the healthcare provider's duty is to mitigate suffering. It is to mitigate suffering. It is to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. And there exist no exceptions to this rule. So long as the healthcare system goes by this principle, things will work to people's advantage. they will get the best care that's possible under the circumstances. We cannot give here in Trivandrum the same care that will be available in Memorial Sloan Kettering Institute in USA. That's not expected. Realistically, the optimal care, what we can afford to give, accessible to the common man, that's what we should be achieving for. Kamal, this COVID brought up all these issues where there was good leadership, like in Tata Memorial Hospital. The system continued, and I didn't know this. I didn't know, Dr. Sudeep, that you had taken care of those construction workers. I fold my hands to your institution. And we saw that to a large extent in Kerala. Migrant workers are called guest workers. Community kitchens were set up, and the state took responsibility to, when it was possible, eventually, not only to house them till then, but them back safe. So it's a lot about leadership, but fundamentally, it's about accepting the duty of care. And Kamal, if I may go one step further and take 2 more minutes, where does this take us back? I mean, okay, in maybe at least by June 2021, we should be rid of this virus. Hopefully with enough new vaccines and all, this would be something in the past. Will we go back to where we were? Where in a situation where 98% of the people with cancer did not get even basic interview, where a family had to go to the High Court of Andhra Pradesh pleading for permission to kill their only child because they could not bear to see the child suffering. While at the same time, that family had gone into an enormous debt. For a villager with no money, being 16 lakhs in debt is not a small thing. Will they ever survive? And the worst infliction of suffering, that child, after 3.5 years of pain, I can show the picture if you have a minute. That child, after 3.5 years of pain, died alone in an intensive care unit, snatched away from the family, not even being able to hold this appropriate care. These are 3 major ills of the system. 1, a disease-focused care which does not take into consideration pain and other suffering. 2, catastrophic health expenditure. Do you know that 55 million Indians are pushed below poverty line in India in 1 year? 55 million, 5.5 crores, more than 4% of our population in 1 year. And inappropriate end-of-life care. Will we go back to the same thing? COVID has demonstrated the impact forcibly. You mentioned the cracks earlier. The cracks are demonstrated clearly. Will we glue them up and proceed with a better system? Or will we forget all this and go back to the horror stories that we were living with?
I believe that there would be an improvement for sure, that this pandemic should lead to a certain kind of radical changes about people's perception towards healthcare, and I also believe that this pandemic will also make people expect their political leaderships also to put health first before anything else. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, we are about to end this session. So one closing remark from you, and then we will go forward to our next session, which Dr. Sanjeev is moderating, and we will be joined by the next set of esteemed speakers.
Yeah, no, I will echo what Dr. Rajagopal said. We have to invest in the system, move away from disease-focused approach to comprehensive healthcare approach, giving more attention to preventive and promotive care, and looking after the need of all patients, not just for disease, but as he mentioned, the psychosocial aspects and end of life care. COVID has been a terrible example how those who died in isolation, and then how their bodies were treated when they were taken for cremation and burial. We need to take care of some of these aspects. This has a serious impact on psychosocial aspects of the people, not just those who suffer, but the whole family and the whole society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. Since this week is also about paying our reverence and our gratitude for the health workers who are on the line of duty, and also those who fall while providing this very critical care for our society. I'll go to Dr. Gupta, and Dr. Gupta, this is just a remembrance for those. Do you know any of the healthcare professional from your hospital, from your contact, or your in your knowledge, who lost his life while providing care or fighting for COVID-19 during this pandemic? I would like to, you can remember them, you can tell about their story, a brief in couple of lines, so that our audience will also get to know, because we don't know that how many people have lost their life in the healthcare system. We don't have any clear statistics, and more than statistics, these are all the human being who lost their life while trying to save others.
So, by the grace of God, at Tata Memorial Center, we have had some of our colleagues and employees who have become infected, but everybody has been fine and taken care of. And I pray to God that it continues that way. You are right that a number of healthcare workers have lost their lives, but along with healthcare workers, we would also like to remember the police personnel. Police are always at the long end of the stick, and we fail to recognize their contribution. During our functioning, we could not have functioned if our supply chains were disrupted. And we are grateful to the Mumbai police and to the Navi Mumbai police. They went out of their way to make sure that our vehicles and our transport was uninterrupted, and we received everything that we wanted to receive, including medications and other supplies. I would just like to remember my teacher from AIIMS, Dr. J.N. Pandey. I did my MBBS from AIIMS as well as MD Medicine and DM, and he was my professor of internal medicine when I trained there, and he was one of the finest clinicians, one of the greatest clinicians, one of the most intelligent individuals that I have ever met. And unfortunately, he lost his life to COVID a couple of months ago. He was currently working at the Sitaram Bhartiya Hospital. His students are spread all over the world, and all of us deeply remember him, and we are very sad that we lost him to a disease like COVID. So my condolences to his family, and if any one of them are listening to this, then scores and hundreds of his students will continue to remember him for a long, long, long time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Dr. Rajgopal, you know any of those warriors who lost their life for whom you want to pay a tribute?
From those personally known to me, none has. And the mortality rate in Kerala has continued to be low. But now that you ask me, I would pay my respect. I wouldn't name the person. A doctor who got COVID and survived and then went back to work. I mention her because even before she got COVID, she was shunned by everybody in that housing colony. She got nasty looks, abusive language, and she was called selfish. Can you believe that? She was called selfish because she went out and brought danger to them. And when she recovered and came back and she insisted on going back to work, they continued to be nasty to her. Meetings were held even with the social distancing, impeaching her. And unfortunately, we beat all those pans and things and clapped from balconies. But on the ground, some horrendous things happen. I'll pay respect to all those people who, despite all the risk, continue to remember that they are healthcare providers and remember that they cannot afford to stay home and be safe. They cannot afford that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajgopal. And it's a really an inspiring story that despite all this social stigmatization and yourself getting infected, going back to the work means a lot. Thank you so much for mentioning this. I think a wonderful person who is doing her duty to the best of possible, with the best of human values. Dr. Sanjeev, would you like to mention somebody?
No, I immediately think of my colleague in the UN. He was involved in work across the world, and unfortunately passed away recently. So there are many of them. I wouldn't like to go into one, but each one of them needs attention, and it is a reminder that we have to do a lot more in making sure such people who are providing care at the risk of their life, putting their families into danger, they need utmost care. All preventive facilities should be made available to them. They are overworked. We need to make sure. And if there are any vacancies in the system, like Kerala did in one day recruited 276 doctors, rest of the states must follow that example. Make sure that they are protected and they are not overworked. Whatever they have to do, they must provide that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. With this, I would like to close our session today. I'll thank Dr. Sudeep Gupta, Dr. Rajgopal, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar for their wonderful insight.